watching the India Development Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and what a show we have lined up for you this evening. I must first give you an idea of what we're talking about. We're going to start off talking about the vaccine news that has the world enthused, the stock markets of course as well. It's a company called Moderna, which says that it has found positive results in clinical trials of 8 patients in the United States. Is there enough to get our hopes up? That's the top big story that we're tackling on the show today. We also have a very special interview coming up. We're going to be speaking with Amit Agarwal of Amazon. He's the country head of Amazon, and we'll be asking him about Amazon's plans while we are planning to go vocal for local. So a lot of that lined up for you, but let me begin with the big story. So Moderna vaccine has become an overnight buzzword and sensation. Out of the blue, this relatively small company has come into the limelight. Its stock price in the US has been zooming because of a report it has put out yesterday. In this report, it claims some positive results from clinical trials of 8 patients. There's a trial that has been going on, a testing mechanism that has been going on since March with 45 patients, and now this report talks about 8 of them which managed to produce antibodies to COVID-19 after undertaking doses of the vaccine. Is it too good to be true? Are we seeing light at the end of the tunnel? How much of a glimmer of hope is there? Let's first take a look. All right, to give us a sense of how much we can get our hopes up from the Moderna vaccine, I'm joined now by Dr. Ramanan Laxminarayan. He's of course Director of the Center for Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policy. He's one of those few people who we can call a health economist and can give us a really deep insight and perspective. Dr. Laxminarayan, great to have you on the show. I want to start with your very simple take on the Moderna vaccine. It's only 8 people. But is it very exciting to everyone right now because it has had positive results and it's one of the first to have these kind of results?
So, Tamanna, let me explain what this really means. The technology that Moderna is using is a novel one. It's called an mRNA technology. It takes a messenger RNA and it's using the direct introduction of that into the human body to see if antibodies are produced. This is not the usual way in which we would produce vaccines. Most of the vaccines we've had through all this, the decades that we've had vaccines are either inactivated, which is take a virus and make it, pretty much kill it or, weaken it. This is how we normally have vaccines. So this is a very new way of doing vaccines. And it has some advantages. The scale up can be quite fast, but this is very early stage. So for your viewers, they have to understand what a phase 1 trial means. Phase 1 trial is typically done on about tens of patients, and you're only looking for safety and immunogenicity. So in lay language, it means you're looking to see if there are any side effects, do patients suddenly die or have very severe disease because of it, and are you able to get an antibody response? Now, Moderna has unusually, talked about its results after just 8 patients. There are actually 45 patients that are enrolled in that trial. And this vaccine takes 2 doses, given about 25, 28 days apart. So it is still very early days because after this, there's still a phase 2 trial. We don't know if the vaccine is efficacious, which means that does it actually work in patients to stop them from getting COVID disease? We have no idea at this point in time. So I think it's good because all progress is good. This is one of 116 odd projects globally on this, but I think it's still too early to say if this is the vaccine that's going to be useful for the world.
So clearly there is a race, among countries and companies for the vaccine, and we'll get into that in a bit. Just to understand this a little better. So what this vaccine or what this trial has shown in 8 patients is that these patients had more antibodies in them than those who have recovered from COVID-19. Does that effectively mean that this kind of a result would make someone relatively safe from getting COVID-19 or relatively immune from getting COVID-19? And what about the 3 people who did develop some side effects, which is 3 out of 8?
Yeah, so in this vaccine, they were looking for what is called neutralizing antibodies. So they were looking to see if they had antibodies that would potentially neutralize coronavirus. And they did, which is great. And 8 out of 8 developed these antibodies. We don't know about the remaining 37. Remember, this is still very early. And this is not randomized, which means the patients go out there, they're still exposed to coronavirus as everyone else is in the population. So it is not a randomized trial. And the second part of this is that this is still, we don't, the 3 out of 8, had slight fever, which could indicate that their body is developing an immune response. But large scale, looking for safety at a large scale requires at least a few thousands of people to be vaccinated. And so if you have, say, a side effect that only shows up in 1 in every 1,000 or every 10,000 people, you won't find that from a small study like this. You'll only find this in a much larger study. But 1 in 10,000 people having side effects which are serious is a big problem, because you're trying to prevent a disease for which very few people will have very bad outcomes. And then you don't want the vaccine to actually be having a high rate of bad outcomes as well. So there is still, they've crossed the one hurdle, but they have many other hurdles to go. And like I said, it's still pretty early days for this vaccine. Let me also mention that there are other vaccines going on as well, which are using different virus platforms or inactivated virus, including in India. And I wouldn't rule any of these out at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, if you look at the 8 candidates in clinical evaluation, and that's the World Health Organization list, I see 4 companies from China, 3 from the United States, and 1 from the UK. At this point, are we to understand that all of these companies, and Moderna is one of them, is equally placed to be first in developing a vaccine that works? And what is that first looking like? What is a safe enough timeline?
So I think you have to remember that the earliest we've developed a vaccine against a virus in the past is 5 years for Ebola, and that was a huge effort, and it was obviously against a disease that was much more deadly than COVID-19. But 5 years was fast compared to what it normally takes, is more like 10 years. You have to remember the rotavirus vaccine that India introduced was almost 30 years from when they started working on it to when the vaccine came out. 30 years. So these don't happen, overnight, but still there's a lot of money going into this. So realistically, even if a vaccine candidate were to be shown to be safe and efficacious by the end of 2020, which is still pretty fast, there is still a process after that in order to manufacture that vaccines in the billions of doses. And remember, we've never given a vaccine at such large scale. And the other thing to remember about the Moderna vaccine is it has to be given intravenously, which means it has to be, injected by someone, not just a health worker, but probably someone with a nurse or a doctor training. And it requires special syringes and so forth. This is not a vaccine that can be deployed in the field like we deploy a pneumococcal or a rotavirus vaccine. It's a very complex vaccine to deliver. It has to be given in 2 doses, 4 weeks apart. And I just don't see that this would be the vaccine at the cost at which it would come out to being a vaccine that could make much of a difference for India. I think other candidates are more likely to be in that frame than the mRNA vaccine.
Oh, that's a really good point. So then let's broaden the scope of where we are with the vaccines. You mentioned earlier that there are 116 sort of trials going on. Now, when we've spoken earlier to those who are part of some of these measures and are trying to get a vaccine out, they've talked about a year at least, with maybe, in fact, Serum Institute has talked about the possibility of some kind of a vaccine by October of this year. Do you think that any of these are achievable, ambitious?
They're highly ambitious, and I would give them a small chance of success. I would think that a vaccine would take probably into June of next year, and that's the point at which we can start scaling up. So I'm saying this on the basis of the fact that we've never done this before. It doesn't mean it's impossible. but it just means that it's unlikely that it will happen because there are many challenges, right? You've got to get the adjuvant, the thing that you give with the vaccine to boost the body's response to it. You have to get that right. You have to make sure that, like I said, the vaccine is completely effective and safe. Safety is a very important parameter here. We can't vaccinate a billion Indians and without being 100% sure about this. And of the other vaccine candidates, not all of them are actually in this
Yeah.
phase 1 trial. Many of them are what are called preclinical, which means they're probably being tested out on mice or other animals to make sure that they are safe in the animals before they give them to humans. Only a couple of vaccines, this one, another one by a company called Inovio, and of course the Oxford vaccine, which the Serum Institute is also interested in, are the ones which are in the phase 1 trial. So we're making good progress. I think much better than we normally would have, but it's still early.
So then now let me come to the treatments that are available. We've had, Dr. Ramanan, a lot of word on the Gilead drug remdesivir. I hope I'm saying it correctly. China now says it has some kind of a medicine that will not even require a vaccine to come in. Do you think that that will be the sort of stopgap we will look at? Because right now there is no real treatment. It's all up to how patients respond to symptomatic medication and their own immunity.
Yeah, I think it's still early days for the treatment as well, Tamanna, because remdesivir had a very average sort of an outcome. It delayed the progression of symptoms, but not a significant impact on mortality, which is what we really care about. And the Chinese drug, there is still too little that's known about it, and we don't have enough data on this to know if it's helpful. There are other drugs. Ivermectin is a drug that has been tried out. There seems to be some promise there. It's a drug that we know has been used for a long time for river blindness in Africa, for instance. So we have some other drugs which are also existing drugs that are being tried out, but so far nothing that's going to be a silver bullet just yet for us. So I think we're still hoping for something else to come out, and hopefully either be the drug or the vaccine.
Okay, let me just switch gears a bit, because I know you study very closely and have interest in the economic side of things as well. You are a health economist. We are now in lockdown 4.0. In India, and this time it's the states who've taken the lead to decide what they need for their specific states. Apart from a few zones and cities, like from where I'm speaking to you from in Mumbai, things are opening up. What is your assessment really of India's handling of the economic situation? I know you have argued that the lockdown need not be extended unnecessarily. It is causing a lot of harm in terms of loss of livelihood. Do you think we're at the right approach, or are we still being too slow in opening things up?
No, I think we're on the. I mean, I think the benefits of the lockdown probably were not that great for the last 2 or 3 weeks. It was just pushing the epidemic curve out. But I think the approach that is being taken now is exactly the right one, which is to focus on containment in neighborhoods or smaller areas, number one. Number two, to give state governments and local authorities the decision on which those areas will be. And number three, there is now a focus on really reducing mortality, which I think is the right thing to do. I know we all look at the case data and say, oh my God, this is going up. We have to remember the case data is just a function of testing. You test more, you're going to get more cases. And so I don't think we should be alarmed at the rising cases. That was anyway bound to happen. And it's also a function of the fact that we're testing more, which is a good thing. But if we focus on deaths and we focus on reducing deaths, we focus on the reverse quarantine of keeping people above the age of 60 or 65 indoors, I think we can probably do much better than many other countries on this. And the one thing I want to add is that the single most important factor in cutting down the epidemic globally seems to be so far, again, seems to be not temperature, not humidity, not latitude, but really how soon a lockdown was put in place. And countries that did early lockdowns have seen huge benefits. And if they delayed their lockdown, they really paid a price. So I think we've invested in something which is the lockdown, and now we need to follow up on that investment with trying to make sure that we also keep the caseload down and the number of deaths down by making sure that we're doing early identification of people who are likely to progress to severe disease. And so this is the work that lies ahead of us at this point in time.
How soon do you think it will be safe to start living normally, quote unquote? And by this I mean, schools reopening, educational institutions, offices, etc., people going out and about, public transport, at the rate at which India is going. And we've crossed 1 lakh cases. You made a valid point that that's not the number you should look at. You should look at the mortality, which is relatively fewer. But by this pace, do you see return to normalcy and living with COVID 2-3 months down the line, or what is the time frame you have in mind?
I think we're looking at this for at least 6 months, possibly longer than that. And the reason is because even at this stage, this virus has only gotten to about 1% of the population. That would be my guess, probably less than that, which means a lot of people are still susceptible to the virus. And as we go forward, it's not a question of individual risk for us. Remember, most of us, 99% of us who get this virus will either have a form that we don't know about, or it will be mild, or we'll be fine. It is for that 1% that we're actually all doing what we're doing. And that 1% happens to be our grandmothers, our parents, people who are above the age of 60 or 65. So even after this, it is not as if children going back into school is going to cause a serious threat to children per se. It is really the fact that they might take the disease home to their grandparents. That's really the major risk factor here. And I think we've got to understand why we're doing what we're doing. I don't think we should individually fear the virus. For most of us, the virus is nothing to fear about. We've done this entire lockdown, everything, to prevent deaths in the elderly. And as I said way before, this is really a battle to save the elderly. And having invested so much in this battle, let's continue that part a little longer to make sure we do the distancing, the hand washing, the mask wearing, because this will slow down the epidemic and will give hospitals a chance to take care of the caseload as it arrives rather than being overwhelmed. So that is still a process for the next 6 months at least, and possibly even longer than that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Laxminarayan, for speaking with us today and breaking things down. So that's the word coming in. About 6 months before you get used to a new normal, you can move around, and this is important because you want to make sure that the elderly don't face mortality because of COVID-19. Thank you so much for speaking with me.